Welcome to Alberta Conservation Association's Harvest Your Own podcast, the resource for everything hunting, navigating through the field, the butcher shop, and the kitchen. Life is all about great food. Let's get started.
Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Brad Fenson, an avid outdoor enthusiast who has worked as a freelance journalist, photographer, and public speaker for over 3 decades. I have hunted, fished, and foraged all my life and hope to share my passion for the outdoors. Along the way, I want to encourage everyone to harvest wild proteins and enjoy the satisfaction of providing the next meal for your family. Our goal is to educate, entertain, and inspire individuals to get outdoors and create a connection between food, health, and your future meals. Welcome to Harvest Your Own. Today, our special guest is Matt Besko, and Matt is a wildlife disease and licensing specialist with Alberta Environment and Parks. He's been there for about 30 years there or in other provinces. Matt, how are you today?
I'm doing really well, Brad. Always a great day.
Yes. Maybe you can provide a little bit of background on your career and explain what a wildlife health and licensing person is.
Sure. So I've been involved in fish and wildlife management now for, as you said, about 30 years, 3 different provinces. Been involved largely on big game and habitat management, as well as 5 years as director of fisheries, director of wildlife policy, and in the last year and a half, wildlife health and licensing. So basically what that entails is on the allocation side for both fisheries and game, I administer the licensing program. So all the hunting, all the fishing licenses, a number of other licenses and research permits for anyone that wants to do any studies or collect any fisheries and wildlife related information. On the health side, we have both aquatic health, which involves testing for fisheries, aquatic invasive species in general, as well as wildlife health, which involves all these zoonotic diseases that we have and a number of other pathogens that may affect the health and population stability of Alberta's wildlife. What we've been dealing with over the last 20 years or so has been the emergence and strong proliferation of chronic wasting disease, or CWD, in Alberta, which is now endemic to Alberta's cervids, or members of the deer family, and it remains to be a big focus in my work portfolio.
I don't think I've talked to anyone that has such a hat collection for different jobs and positions and posting and background as with Matt Besko. That was a very thorough description, and if there's a department that's been available to work in at Fish and Wildlife, it sounds like you've been there and had your hands in on everything, which makes for an interesting career, lots of diversity.
Oh yeah, it's been a lot of fun, and I've had the pleasure and privilege to be involved in everything from habitat management to species at risk, to the management of licensing and administration, to health, to allocating game species and fisheries. So it's my passion, my interest, and it's my hobby as well as my career. So it's all in a lifetime's work.
Yeah, you can tell just by talking to you, you have lots of enthusiasm about it.
Oh yeah.
On the other side of it, you help manage wildlife, monitor things, control it, license it, do all of these things. But I know that you're also, you enjoy wild game and look at it in a different way, just besides a job and a career and management. Wildlife is a special treat for all of us in our life that have embraced it, and you're one of the few people that I would say is over the top, like I am.
Yeah, it's all consuming in my life and in my family as well. So, my parents, grandparents, and extended family, and now my kids. It's a big part of our lives, and we just love it. It's something that I couldn't see myself living without at this point.
Yeah, it's funny how it becomes a lifestyle. It's not it's not just a choice. You don't know how you'd live without it.
I honestly don't. And in the last 2-3 months, I made an active choice not to eat domestic meat. Not because I have anything against it, but we have such a strong and an abundant source of game, and I just made that choice that I'm eating game. And believe me, I love eating meat. I'm a carnivore and then some. So I've made that choice. So it's even to the point where, I'm only focusing on game now for my protein. It's really interesting.
We're very fortunate to live in Alberta, where it's a place where we can actually collect enough proteins to feed our family for an entire year without worrying about it. We can make a conscious decision that we want to eat wild, not because we have anything against livestock producers. They play a very important role in providing habitat for wildlife, managing our landscapes, all the rest of it.
I think livestock producers are integral to Alberta's history and the enhancement of habitat for wildlife in the agriculture sector, not just, livestock producers, but grain farmers and managing. I mean, we would not have the abundance of many big game species, if it wasn't for those industries and shared stewardship value, for sure.
Oh, absolutely. So I've really built up wildlife and our appreciation for it, our love for wild game and all of it. And now we throw that CWD question right back in because it scares some people. And you talk about it being endemic in Alberta. What does that actually mean to the average hunter? Like, how do they understand what endemic is?
So basically, when we first got CWD, we saw it as basically an invasive organism in Alberta. And CWD is a prion-related disease, which means it's a misfolded protein, and it's very similar to BSE or mad cow that you find in cattle. And mad cow is a disease by which human beings are susceptible to it, and chronic wasting disease is found primarily that in members of the deer family. And by endemic, it means that Alberta is not just a destination for chronic wasting disease. Chronic wasting disease is now part of the Alberta landscape, and it is a source of disease in North America rather than a sink for disease. So now in much of southern Alberta, CWD is well established in populations of cervids, mostly mule deer, and we're starting to see more and more white-tailed deer get it, and a few more elk and the odd moose.
Yeah, that's important to note because it's here to stay is what endemic means in layman's terms and in short.
Yeah.
And how do hunters deal with that? The fortunate part for Albertans is we have dealt with this for almost 2.5 decades. I don't know if people realize it, but it has been that long since it was first identified, and we had initially some calls, and then we stepped up and asked hunters to take a very significant role in helping with surveillance of where CWD was headed in the province, the numbers, and what it was doing. So a little bit of history on it. Maybe you could fill us in about 25 years in a capsule.
So in the early 2000s, we discovered CWD in a couple of locations, a couple of game farms, and then along the Saskatchewan-Alberta border in the southeast part of Alberta. In the early 2000s, we tested positive mule deer. The likely source of those positives are from Saskatchewan. And initially, when we found these positives occurring, we started to broaden the surveillance and testing and monitoring to determine how many deer we had with chronic wasting disease. So we incorporated a program by which hunters could submit their heads of harvested animals, especially in southeastern part of Alberta, and tested those. 2004, 2005, 6, all the way up to 2008, we had a program by which we wanted to do two things. One is to reduce the rates of prevalence. So we wanted to lower the number of deer that had CWD and lower that. And secondly, slow the rate of disease progression geographically from east to west. So we didn't really want it here in Alberta. We wanted to slow the progression for a couple of reasons. One, we didn't want it infecting clean deer, in quotes, clean deer, and we didn't want it to be established such that it would offer population level effects, such as the loss of bucks, such as 36% declines like they saw in Colorado. So what we did is anytime we found a positive, we had a 10-kilometer diameter circle drawn around that positive, and then we went in with staff and sharpshooters on the ground, and later on, using aerial means via helicopter, removed all the deer within that 10-kilometer area. The program was really effective while it was in place, and we removed as many deer as possible from those positive zones, and our prevalence rates dropped. The pace at which CWD moved geographically slowed dramatically. Now, the other thing that happened at that time is we had a standing policy or rule because we wanted to salvage the meat from the animals that we were culling. So we had a 4-hour turnaround time from the time that animal was harvested to the time that it was processed and tissues removed. And so we would collect the samples for testing at the same time. We'd salvage the meat and have that held until we got the test results. And then from there, we were able to distribute the meat throughout the province to people that needed it. If we weren't able to have those deer processed within, those 4 hours or 5 hours, then we put them in a landfill or incinerated them. Once word got out that there was a lot of deer taken and not a lot of deer, being able to be salvaged, then word got out, and the social license and the public, largely with people that didn't really understand the issue, made a considerable amount of fuss around it, and the social license with respect to being able to continue that program was no longer there. So that program was essentially folded at that time. So as a result of that, CWD has progressed on Alberta's landscape. We have a robust data set. We've been monitoring the prevalence of CWD and notifying hunters as to the disease status of the animals that they have harvested. That being said, now we have CWD about 1 to 2 wildlife management units away from being at the BC-Alberta border. And we have it as far north as probably just north of Lloydminster in there. And then as far west as probably WMU 248, which is Strathcona County. So the geographic spread is significant and grows every year. We have tested a total of about 95,000 heads, of which we have about 3,600 that are positive, and 2,000 of those 3,600 have been sampled in the last 2 years. So the rates of infection and prevalence have gone up significantly.
Yeah, it's obvious that the numbers are getting higher, which is why I wanted to talk to you. The initial management trying to stop that disease must have been very costly, especially when neighboring jurisdictions were not doing anything. So it was just a matter of time before we had to do something else, and that was to utilize hunters to help us do surveillance and monitoring of what is happening with CWD.
This podcast is produced for Harvest Your Own, a program dedicated to those who want to reconnect with food and health through their experiences outdoors. HarvestYourOwn.ca is a resource for individuals to learn more about hunting and the outdoors. There's information to get you started and ensure that your compass stays pointed in the right direction to be successful. Where's your next meal coming from?
Now, there's 2 very positive things here for hunters. Alberta has a program where hunters can turn in a head from any ungulate and have it tested free of charge. That is not common in North America.
Yeah, it's unique to North America, and it's not any ungulate as much as it is any cervid. So we will accept any member of the deer family deer, moose, elk, we won't take sheep because they're not susceptible to the CWD. So that is a great program. We will accept deer or cervids from anywhere in the province, CWD or not, and we will test that animal for hunters and be able to provide them with the results. What we've done is, as CWD progresses, we had a mandatory head submission area, and it got to the point where we were getting about 11,000 heads, which pushed us to the very maximum amount of heads that we can test within a year, and people were getting their testing results after months. And we just didn't want people to have to wait and process their animals and hold that meat and separate it from other products and foodstuffs that they would have in their freezers, and then just to find out that their animal tested positive and they made a choice to throw it out. Yes. Or incinerate it.
Yeah. So it is a personal choice too, and that's one of the things I'm getting at is because there are now zones in southern Alberta that aren't mandatory testing, and some hunters, I've had some of them actually tell me, oh, there must not be a problem there after all this monitoring.
Oh, yeah, no. There's definitely a problem, but we don't need the amount of heads that we did in order to assess prevalence and distribution. And so we remove those from the mandatory list, but we will still test heads if people are concerned about the food value. It does not mean that CWD isn't present. CWD is present, but we don't need to find out exactly what the prevalence rate is in those areas. We have a good handle on that already, and we want to be able to give hunters back their CWD head status earlier or disease status earlier in order for them to make an informed choice as whether or not they want to consume that. Alberta Health, Health Canada, and the World Health Organization have all made the recommendation that any cervid that's harvested should be tested prior to consumption, and that any positively testing cervid should not be consumed by people. There's not been any evidence that CWD has infected human beings. That being said, there was a study done out of Lethbridge by the Prion Research Institute a few years ago that documented a species jump in a laboratory setting by which macaque monkeys were fed CWD-infected meat over a period of years, and some of them came down with CWD. So because we haven't found CWD across many species barriers to date, doesn't mean that people should not be cautious and cognizant about safety.
Yeah, that's right. So the main thing is there are mandatory testing areas. There's others that are optional. Some hunters have decided that they don't feel this is a big risk to them, so they do consume the deer, and we see it on social media. They say, hey, if anyone's got a positive, I'll take it. It is a personal choice, but the health specialists are recommending you don't do it, so that's really important.
Yeah, and I would heed those recommendations. Myself as a hunter and who depends on game as my primary source of protein, and my family as well. My choices, I will not, in fact, nor feed CWD positive tissue to friends, family, or anyone else.
Yeah, I think that's an informed decision is what I would call it. Let's move it one step forward. Hunters in Alberta now are used to being able to submit a head, get it tested, put their meat aside in a separate box or whatever it is until it's time to consume. And we have a great system for doing that and giving hunters that peace of mind and that security. I mean, when we look at neighboring jurisdictions like Montana, they just started a testing program 3 years ago. And it's really because they weren't on it 25 years ago like Alberta, it's chaos down there. They feel that they've lost 25 to 40% of hunters in some zones because it's sort of created mass hysteria and worry amongst people about going out and even field dressing a deer. So right. Albertans are lucky. We've been educated for longer. We have a testing system in place. We are well advised in terms of health, in terms of what to do with the meat and all the rest of it. And we still enjoy great hunting in Alberta. That's the bottom line. We haven't seen a big drop-off of hunters, although mule deer are susceptible to it, more susceptible to it. I would say it's even harder to draw a mule deer tag now than it was 20 years ago.
Yeah, it's the number of hunters that are keen to continue hunting deer, mule deer, and be able to use the draw system in order to have that opportunity certainly is high. And I think the real danger of chronic wasting disease is twofold. One is once it becomes well established in a deer population, and as we've seen to jurisdictions in Wyoming and Colorado who have had CWD longer than we have had, once CWD prevalence reaches between 20 and 25% in a population, then that population decreases. So we're seeing population decreases of up to 36% in some places. I know in Saskatchewan, in the very localized places, prevalence rates are up around 85%, and population level effects are being observed. So we don't want CWD to run unfettered to the degree by which our populations of deer are going to suffer. The first, because the incubation times around CWD are relatively long, it's about 18 to 24 months post-infection that deer will actually show symptoms. And those symptoms, the actual wasting itself and lethargy and loss of weight and all of that occur largely in the last month or two of that deer's life. So we frequently get samples of deer from, what we would term healthy, robust animals, and in fact, they're CWD positive. So the first animals, because of the incubation rates, the primary class of animal that is susceptible to CWD and tends to spread it are mature mule deer bucks, which is not great for hunters. And in other jurisdictions, the first animals to experience losses in terms of the observation and the composition of herds is you tend to see losses and fewer mature bucks. And that's the real concern for us, is we see fewer mature animals, and then once the population has a positivity rate of 20 to 25%, then the population itself suffers as a whole. Right now, Alberta's positive rate is probably around 11% in general, so we don't want that to occur at any higher levels. But you're absolutely right. Alberta hunters have learned to adjust their hunting habits. We're well informed as to what CWD is and how it affects our populations. And we have this very robust testing and monitoring program. We know where to drop our heads off. We know what the protocol is with respect to getting your test results. So that certainly is working. And we're working on a couple of new things too.
Yeah, you're always trying to make it easier for hunters. You tried out some new testing this year for in the field by hunters, and you had some people test out new kits. Is that correct?
Yeah, we distributed probably about 100 to 150 test kits by which, rather than hunters just removing the head and dropping the head off for disease testing at our many collection sites and freezers that are located throughout the province, is to try and pilot a system that places in the States have already incorporated into their testing and monitoring regimes, and that's hunters have test kits. They have this little tool called a scupula that enables a hunter to go into the back of a deer skull, where the big opening where the spine enters the brain, and that's called the foramen magnum. And you go into the foramen magnum with this scupula, and you remove what we would call the obex, which is that brain tissue that and it forks into the lobes from the spine, and that is where we test for the prions for CWD. And then on the lower jaw, there's these two kidney bean-shaped lymph nodes, the retropharyngeal lymph nodes, and we collect those as well. So hunters watch a video, and it sounds kind of complicated and difficult, but it really isn't. Once you see the video, you're able to say, oh, yeah, that's not hard. We remove the very last vertebrae between the spine and the brain, and we go in with this scoop, take out the tissue, drop it into a container, find these two kidney bean shaped lymph nodes at the bottom of the jaw. Find those. They're easy to find because they're shaped like kidney beans. They're the only thing shaped like a kidney bean. And you drop them into the jar, you label it with your information, and you bring it in. And the advantage of that is that we don't need to spend a lot of money on storing heads, making sure that we, rent all of these trucks and so forth, the transportation, the weight, the processing time to remove tissues. That's done by hunters. So I would like to see that program be able to grow and expand over the next couple of years, and we'll see how efficient we are of actually getting the good tissues and getting great samples. And I'm confident. I think Alberta's hunters are really good. They're keen and knowledgeable, and I think the efficiency that they'll use in order to get these samples will be really promising.
I agree with you. I think that hunters will embrace it, and if it speeds up the testing process, because you don't have to thaw heads and take them apart, and the results coming back at an earlier rate for hunters that could participate in the field would be a huge bonus for everyone. Not everybody processes their own game. They pay a butcher to cut it up, and to have to throw it out afterwards is a bit of a, I've talked to some people, it is painful for them, and I understand that. I cut up my own, so what I do is I take an animal apart in muscle groups and freeze it in large pieces. I don't put in a lot of extra effort and cutting and trimming and all of it into the deer until I get my results back. But it is testament to Alberta hunters that have, lived with this for so long now that we have a system, we trust it, we live with it, we find ways to hold that meat still precious until we know whether it's safe or not to eat, and then we can move forward. So I'm glad to hear there are new initiatives out there.
This podcast was made possible by Alberta Conservation Association and the Harvest Your Own community. If you're interested in harvesting your own food, there's a comprehensive collection of information to gain insight and knowledge. Head to the field, harvest your own protein, prepare it, and taste the results. HarvestYourOwn.ca is a library of information from getting started and geared up to processing, butchering, and cooking wild game to make the connection between health and food.
You and I talked before, and there's a couple of recommendations for hunters at the end of the season because you don't know what the test results are for sometimes months. What should we do with the field equipment that we use to field dress and process those deer?
Well, as you and I probably grew up when we actually harvested animals in the field, it was rare that we used any sort of PPE, any sort of equipment in order to do that. And for a number of years now, I've been incorporating various means by which to keep myself safe and others safe when we're harvesting deer that are in an area and that are of a size class or an age class or species that I'm worried about CWD. So it is often right now the first thing that I do before we even handle and deal with our equipment or anything like that. I will, in the process of field dressing my animals, I will throw 2 pairs of gloves into my pack and into my pockets. They weigh nothing, and I'll just use gloves, and I'll make sure that when I handle this animal, even though I may not be handling spinal material or brain material, there's still a probability of prions to be in other tissues in that animal. So I will use gloves in the field when I'm field dressing that animal. I will have a means by which I'll be able to take those gloves and put them in a sealed Ziploc after I'm in the field. I'll take my knives and I'll make sure that I keep them separately, also in a Ziploc after I field process that. And then when I process the animal, either roughly through large cuts like you do, or if I take that animal back into my garage or my shop, wherever I'm processing it, I have a dedicated table for that, dedicated meat trays. And after I finish processing that animal, I wash everything down with bleach. And bleach is the gold standard for dealing with the prion. When we were managing and doing the cull program in the early 2000s, we always soaked our knives and other field equipment in bleach. So I make sure before I put those knives or anything else in with other field equipment or knives, my grinder, my vacuum sealer, anything that came into contact with this animal, I give it a wipe with bleach and make sure that I'm as safe as possible when I deal with that animal.
Just a good safety protocol to get it, is to start using. Use the bleach, use the gloves, think about personal protective equipment when you're in the field, just like they would in an abattoir when they're dealing with domestic.
Exactly.
Yeah. So those are all great things to remember, not consider, but remember when we head to the field next year and make plans for going hunting. One debate that I've had with a few hunters, Matt, and maybe you can shed some light onto this. If CWD is in a carcass, in the spinal tissue, how do we dispose of them where we don't spread CWD on our own?
We have two primary recommendations for carcass movement and disposal. And what we do not encourage anyone to do is to go from one WMU to the next and then pitch their carcasses into the ditch or, in the forest zone or anything like that. One, it's really unethical. Secondly, you could be spreading CWD by translocating prions. So what we recommend to hunters and the advice that we give them is to either go into a registered landfill by which the prions are really resistant to temperature extremes and everything else. And they can live on in soils for, years and years. But if we take them to a landfill, a registered landfill, then these areas would be able to contain prions in one particular area throughout the life of that prion before it actually becomes inactive. The second place is actually through a incineration. So if you can find somewhere by which you can take your animals to be incinerated, and some municipalities will have an incinerator, and you'll be able to dispose of it that way. So either in an approved registered landfill site or incinerated.
And I think this is a really important topic because everyone sees discarded carcasses in places where they shouldn't be every year. But hunters do have a choice. You can pack things like game bags and bone out an animal where it is harvested, keep the head for samples, have all the meat separately, use PPE, and you won't spread the disease. And if you're worried about disposing the carcass afterwards, that is probably the best way to deal with it. Leave it right where it fell.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Take the meat. Some people have told me in some jurisdictions it is challenging to get a carcass into the landfill. They don't want to take them. So I understand that is the case in some places. So learning how to bone out an animal in the field and deal with it is important. And of course, we have lots of that information on Harvest Your Own, including videos that you can watch.
Pretty good source of information too is the rich source of techniques and protocols that you have on Harvest Your Own. I think it's really valuable for hunters to be able to get those skills and apply them into the field. And the old expression, there's 100 ways to skin a cat or many ways to skin a cat. Well, same thing applies to any game animal as well. And I still see things that just surprise me. Like every year, people have a variety of different techniques that they use, and whatever works. But I think whatever works and it's safe, and if you can effectively and cleanly debone your meat in the field, and you're dealing just with the meat, and it's a lot lighter if you have to pack it out.
Absolutely. And I mean, we have articles and there's videos there of how to do it legally, where you can leave evidence of sex and still have the tag on one of the hindquarters. And it is easier to do. It's a lot easier to deal with when you get home. And it's important to know that is the best option when you're hunting in areas with mandatory submission for CWD.
What I find, I think one element, and I always process my own meat. And it just adds to the experience for me. It's an enjoyment rather than a huge workload. But if you are someone that does not process your own meat and you take it in, I think it's a good idea to ask the meat processor, the butcher, how are they handling meat? And because if you take it and they mix meat or they don't clean their equipment in between different processing jobs, then you're dealing with prions that are sometimes really persistent, and you have the risk of cross contamination. So if you are, I think it's a very good idea to ask whoever's processing your game for you what sort of safety protocols that they would have in place in order to minimize cross-contamination from other carcasses or tissues.
Yeah, I think this is all very good information for hunters, just to remind them of what's going on. The big thing is, I want to reiterate that hunters shouldn't be fearful about going deer hunting. We've seen a mass exodus of hunters in some states where this is now new to them. We've had it for decades. We have a great system. Like you mentioned, it is unique in North America. We're fortunate to have our testing done free of charge. We have places where we can drop it off. We have protocols in place. We know how to deal with it. So new hunters that are coming into the fold should look at it as benefiting from what we've learned over the last 20-some years.
Oh, absolutely. And, hunters are absolutely key to the management of chronic wasting disease, not just from disease testing and monitoring geographic spread, but also as a means by which we utilize harvest in order to influence population structure, size, distribution of where these deer are, and hunters are key to that process. So, if you are dealing with prevalence rates right now, which are 11%, and they are suspected of going up, that still means that, you have 89% of deer that are not infected with CWD. So if you use the testing program, use the protocols and PPE that you have access to that information for right now, you're still able to enjoy hunting in Alberta and incorporate all elements of that hunting experience into your lifestyle, from the minute that you harvest that animal in the field to the moment that you ingest it and enjoy it in a really good meal is still available for you. And we strongly encourage that.
And that's why I started the conversation off at that. It is an important part to many of us. It's part of our lifestyle. It's part of our meal rituals and all our enjoyment of our food and stuff. So to bring it full circle for people, I think what we're doing is informing them, giving them the right options. And, the good thing about Fish and Wildlife is they've been dealing with this for so long that they're on top of it in terms of information. Where do hunters go to find out more about this?
Find out more about chronic wasting disease and different ways by which you can participate in different monitoring programs and what the risks are with respect to CWD. We have information on the Alberta Environment website, as well as My Wild Alberta. And there's a number of sources of information about chronic wasting disease in North America. If you do a really good Google search, use a good search engine, Google Scholar, something like that, and that will give you, the baseline information to assess the current status and distribution of chronic wasting disease in North America as well as Alberta. And it's really important because this is a disease that could have potentially really serious consequences to deer populations that we really enjoy here in Alberta, and more informed hunters are, and we're actually participants in a management process by which we mitigate the effects of this disease. And hunters are critical to this whole process, and we need them to continue hunting and continue doing the good work at collecting this information.
Yes, I feel very fortunate to live in a place where we're the leaders in terms of dealing with this. I see other places that have fallen behind, and it's really sad in terms of what it's doing to not only the deer but to hunters. And I'm glad we have that in Alberta. I also know that it's got to be extremely challenging for you and your colleagues, because when you're dealing with people's passions like the outdoors and hunting and deer management and all the rest of it, you're never going to please everyone. So it's a balancing act where you're going to be able to inform people and do what's right in terms of how you're being led by science, but you're not going to make everyone happy.
No, what I've found in the course of a 30-year career is, if you go into a career like this thinking that you're going to solve the world's problems and make every stakeholder happy and have, the best conditions for everyone, that's a really unrealistic expectation. The best that you can hope for is you achieve conditions on the landscape where you have healthy and abundant populations of game species for the use and enjoyment of all Albertans, and you minimize human-wildlife conflicts. You have a system by which you fairly allocate, and there's going to be some people, even with that, are not going to be happy for a number of reasons or interests. And that doesn't mean that they don't have valid reasons or interests. I think it's very important to listen to all people's views and consult with them meaningfully and be able to account for that when you're making management decisions. And everybody's a biologist. Everybody that has been into the field and has directly observed wildlife has an opinion. And I think the worst thing that we can do is dismiss people's observations, opinions, and ideas. We can't dismiss them. We have to say, you have been an active participant in this activity. This is what you've seen. I can provide you some contextual information, but what you're saying is valuable.
Absolutely. And, we're very fortunate to have people like you have been working on issues like this for over 3 decades, 30 years, and you're extremely knowledgeable. You know how to relay the information back. You've been there step by step, and I think that's the positives. CWD is often looked at as a very negative thing for deer, for hunters, and all the rest of it. But we do have lots to celebrate in Alberta in terms of being on top of it, being able to monitor it, knowing what to do with the meat, and those things are all positive. When I look at other jurisdictions, and I do get to hunt across North America, not only are we leaders, but we are very lucky to be in a place where we're managing it. We're managing to live with it. We're managing our deer with it at this point. We're
in a very fortunate place in terms of we have probably the most robust data set and program longer than anyone else, monitoring the progression of this disease throughout the province, and protocols that are set up in order to manage the disease on the landscape and to provide good information for hunters in order to make informed decisions. And, things have really come together in Alberta with respect to the abundance and diversity of game species that we're able to hunt here and enjoy, and the diversity in habitats from anywhere from the rocks and the mountains all the way to the prairies, the boreal forest, the parkland, the foothills. All of these places are unique environments that hold so many different game hunting experiences. So you can hunt moose on the Bald Prairie south of Medicine Hat, where a tree to be found is a rare thing, and all the way to north of Fort Chip, in the boreal forest, portions of the Shield. You can hunt moose throughout that range. It's just a really unique place, and I think you're absolutely right, Brad. We're really fortunate in order to have that.
Yes, it's the diversity is wonderful as a hunter. It allows us to have a varied diet, and we want to keep people informed about these things so that they can enjoy a lifestyle with wild game in it every day and not be fearful. And hopefully our kids and our future generations will have the same opportunities that we do. That's the bottom line. So, thank you for the information. Not everyone will digest it the same, but it's important to get these messages out.
I think so. And I want to thank you as well, Brad, for giving me the opportunity to bring this information forward and for you to show, an interest and know the importance for your listeners. I think that's just stellar work. Thank you.
You're welcome. And here's to meeting up in the field sometime and sharing a goose blind or breaking out multiple sets of PPE to field dress a deer somewhere.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Brad. All the best.
We hope to inspire people to reconnect with nature and appreciate where your food comes from by harvesting your own. For more information on getting started or to learn specifics about the Field to Fork experience, visit harvestyourown.ca and follow on Facebook and Instagram. Check back often for new material, recipes, and videos that are posted regularly. Please subscribe to Harvest Your Own podcast and take the time to rate and review the show to help us build a dedicated core of passionate hunters as our regular audience. Until next time, embrace the outdoors and all it has to offer. Thanks for joining us.